The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant clinking of champagne glasses. The invitation felt like a slap in the face, crisp white cardstock mocking my empty bank account. Family reunion, it declared in elegant script, followed by the address of a resort I couldn't even dream of affording. They knew. They had to know the knife they were twisting with every word, every carefully chosen detail designed to highlight the chasm between their lives and mine. My name is Lillian, and this is the story of how my family tried to erase me, only to find out they had severely underestimated the woman I had become. If you have a family and they have ever made you feel worthless, subscribe right now. Growing up, we weren't wealthy, but we were a family. Summer vacations were spent camping, not jet-setting. Birthdays meant homemade cakes, not lavish parties. Still, there was a sense of belonging, a feeling of being loved that money couldn't buy. That is, until my cousins started finding success in their own lives. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the dynamic shifted. The conversations revolved around stock options and real estate investments, topics I couldn't contribute to with my barista salary and mounting student loan debt. I tried to keep up, to maintain the connection, but it was like speaking a different language. Their eyes would glaze over whenever I talked about my art, my passions. They saw my struggles as failures, my dreams as foolish fantasies. Then came the whispers, the hushed tones whenever I entered the room, the glances exchanged, the subtle digs disguised as concern. "Lillian, are you sure you're managing all right?" my aunt would ask, her voice dripping with a pity that stung more than any insult. The invitations to their exclusive gatherings dwindled, replaced by polite but distant holiday cards. I felt like an outsider looking in, a ghost haunting the edges of a life that was once mine. The official ban came in the form of a phone call from my older brother Mark. He was always the golden child, the one who excelled at everything he touched. He was now a partner at a prestigious law firm. His voice was smooth, carefully neutral, but his words were like shards of glass. "Lillian," he began, "the family has been discussing the reunion." He paused, as if searching for the right way to deliver the blow. "We've decided it's best if you don't come." I remember the air leaving my lungs, a cold emptiness spreading through my chest. "Best for whom?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. He stammered something about not wanting me to feel uncomfortable, about the others being concerned about my financial situation. He painted a picture of me being surrounded by opulent displays of wealth, feeling inadequate and out of place. It was a lie, of course. They weren't worried about my comfort. They were worried about their image. My presence, my poverty, would be a stain on their perfect facade.
"We love you, Lillian," he concluded, the words hollow and meaningless. "We just think it's better this way." The weeks that followed were a blur of tears and self-doubt. I questioned everything, replaying every conversation, every interaction, searching for clues I had missed. Was I really that much of a burden? Had I become so consumed by my own struggles that I had failed to notice how far apart we had grown? The rejection cut deep, leaving a wound that refused to heal. I sank into a depression, isolating myself from the few friends I had left. I stopped painting, stopped creating, stopped living. They had succeeded. They had broken me. Or so they thought. Because in the darkest depths of my despair, a flicker of something else began to ignite, a burning, all-consuming desire for revenge. I knew I couldn't let them get away with this. I wouldn't let them define me. I would show them that Lillian was far from finished. I just needed a plan. The person I trusted most was one of them. It wasn't immediate. It was a slow burn of realization, a piecing together of fragments of information, stray comments and uncomfortable silences. It was my cousin, Sarah. We'd been close growing up, sharing secrets and dreams under the cover of childhood innocence. But somewhere along the line, Sarah had chosen sides, aligning herself with the successful branch of the family. Now, she was the one I was going to use against them. The days bled into weeks, each one a little grayer than the last. The rejection from my family wasn't just a social snub, it was a deep existential wound. It seeped into every corner of my life, poisoning my relationships, my work, my sense of self-worth. I found myself waking up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, replaying the phone call with Mark over and over in my head. His words echoed in my ears, each syllable a fresh cut. Sleep became a battlefield, a constant struggle against the demons of doubt and despair. During the day, I went through the motions, forcing myself to smile at customers, to engage in meaningless conversations. But inside, I was hollow, a shell of the person I once was. My art, once my refuge, now felt like a mockery. The canvases stared back at me, blanked and accusing, reflecting my own emptiness. I tried to paint, to pour my pain onto the canvas, but the colors felt dull, lifeless. The inspiration had vanished, replaced by a gnawing sense of inadequacy. What was the point of creating when my own family didn't value me, when they saw my passions as nothing more than a frivolous hobby? I started calling in sick to work, unable to face the world, the pitying glances of my coworkers. My bank account dwindled, the overdue notices piling up on my kitchen counter. I was sinking, drowning in a sea of debt and despair.
I tried to talk to Mark, to reason with him, to understand why they had done this to me. I called him several times, each call going straight to voicemail. I left messages, pleading with him to call me back, to explain, but he remained silent, a ghost on the other end of the line. Finally, I drove to his office, determined to confront him face to face. I waited in the lobby for hours, watching as impeccably dressed lawyers and clients streamed in and out. When Mark finally emerged, he looked surprised, then annoyed to see me. He ushered me into a small, empty conference room, his eyes darting nervously towards the door. "Lillian, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice tight with irritation. I tried to explain how much their decision had hurt me, how it had affected my life. I told him about my financial struggles, my depression, my sense of isolation. But he remained unmoved, his face a mask of polite indifference. He repeated the same tired excuses about not wanting me to feel uncomfortable, about protecting me from the others. It was clear that he wasn't listening, that he had already made up his mind. As I spoke, I noticed him subtly angling his body away from me, as if trying to create physical distance between us. His eyes kept darting to the door, and he repeatedly checked his watch. I realized I was wasting my breath. He wasn't my brother anymore. He was just another member of the elite, determined to maintain the status quo. "Please, Lillian," he said finally, his voice weary. "Just go. You're making a scene." As I walked out of the office, defeated and humiliated, I knew that any hope of reconciliation was gone. The door slammed shut behind me, a final, resounding confirmation of my exile. Driven to the brink, I almost gave up. I almost let them win. The darkness was alluring, a tempting escape from the pain and humiliation. I considered just disappearing, changing my name, starting a new life somewhere far away. But then I thought about my art, about the dreams I had worked so hard to achieve. I thought about my parents, who had always believed in me, who had sacrificed everything to give me a better life. And I thought about my family, about the way they had dismissed me, erased me, as if I were nothing more than a stain on their perfect image. The anger began to simmer again, hotter and more intense than before. I couldn't let them get away with this. I wouldn't let them dictate my life. I would fight back. But how? I was broke, alone, and emotionally drained. I needed a plan, a way to strike back at them where it would hurt the most. And that's when I remembered Sarah. We hadn't spoken in years, but I knew she was still in contact with the rest of the family. She was always the one who craved their approval, the one who would do anything to fit in. Maybe, just maybe, she could be my way in. The idea was a gamble, a long shot, but I was desperate. I started by doing some digging, scouring social media, searching for any information I could find about Sarah and the rest of my family. I discovered that Sarah was working as a public relations manager for a large corporation. She was good at her job, adept at crafting narratives and manipulating public opinion. I also learned that she was deeply insecure, constantly seeking validation from others. She posted incessantly on social media, documenting every aspect of her seemingly perfect life: the perfect job, the perfect boyfriend, the perfect clothes, the perfect family. It was all a facade, of course. I knew Sarah better than anyone. I knew her secrets, her fears, her vulnerabilities, and I knew how to exploit them.
I reached out to her, sending her a casual message on social media, pretending that nothing had happened. "Hey, Sarah, it's been a while. How are you?" To my surprise, she responded almost immediately. She was polite but distant, carefully measuring her words. We exchanged a few pleasantries, catching up on each other's lives. I could sense her hesitation, her uncertainty. She was wary of me, afraid of what I might say or do, but she was also curious, drawn in by the familiarity of our shared past. Over the next few weeks, I slowly started to rebuild our connection, sharing memories, offering support, and feigning genuine interest in her life. I listened patiently to her complaints about her job, her boyfriend, her family, offering advice and encouragement. I made myself indispensable, a confidant she could trust. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, her guard began to drop. The more Sarah opened up, the more I learned. She confessed her own insecurities about her career, her fear of failure, her desperate need for her parents' approval. She revealed details about the family's finances, their rivalries, their secrets. She didn't realize it, but with every word, she was handing me the weapons I needed to dismantle their carefully constructed world. One evening, after several glasses of wine, Sarah let slip something truly explosive. It involved a shady business deal my uncle had orchestrated, one that had potentially devastating consequences for a lot of people. It was the kind of information that could ruin him, and by extension, the entire family. The pieces were finally falling into place. I saw my path forward, a way to not only expose their hypocrisy, but to make them pay for what they had done to me. But it wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed irrefutable proof, and I knew just how to get it. Sarah, bless her naivete, was about to become my unwitting accomplice. I pretended to be sympathetic, offering her a shoulder to cry on, all the while carefully extracting every last detail about the family's upcoming reunion, the location, the guest list, the schedule of events. It was all falling into my lap.
They thought they were untouchable, that their wealth and status shielded them from any consequences. They were wrong. The days leading up to the reunion were a whirlwind of activity. I had rented a small, dingy apartment in a less than desirable part of town, a far cry from the luxurious resort where my family would be celebrating. It was there, surrounded by empty pizza boxes and overflowing ashtrays, that I meticulously planned my revenge. I spent hours researching my uncle's business dealings, gathering evidence, connecting the dots. I contacted a journalist friend, feeding her snippets of information, hinting at a story that could make her career. I knew she wouldn't be able to resist. I also started documenting everything, every conversation with Sarah, every piece of evidence I uncovered. I knew that if things went south, I needed to protect myself. I was no longer the naive, trusting Lillian they had dismissed. I was a woman with a mission, fueled by anger and a burning desire for justice. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. My mind raced constantly, replaying every slight, every insult, every betrayal. I was consumed by the need to make them pay. I knew I was walking a dangerous path, that my actions could have serious consequences, but I didn't care. I had nothing left to lose. The night before the reunion, I found myself standing on the edge of the highway overpass, staring down at the endless stream of headlights. The wind whipped around me, threatening to pull me over the edge. The darkness was inviting, a promise of oblivion. For a moment, I considered giving up, of ending it all. The pain was too much to bear, the weight of their rejection crushing my soul. I closed my eyes, imagining the release, the sweet relief of finally being free. But then I thought about my art, about the joy it brought me, about the stories I still wanted to tell. I thought about my parents, about the sacrifices they had made for me, about the love they had always shown me. And I thought about my family, about the way they had treated me, about the injustice they had inflicted upon me. The anger surged through me again, a powerful, invigorating force. I opened my eyes, my vision clear. I was not going to let them win. I would not let them define me. I would fight back with every fiber of my being. I turned away from the edge, my resolve hardened. The time for despair was over. The time for revenge had come. The woman they tried to erase was about to become their worst nightmare. My hands were shaking, but my heart was steady. The plan was set. It was time to unleash hell. They wouldn't know what hit them.
The storm was coming, and I was about to become it.
I smiled. I played their game, acting the part of this struggling artist, grateful for their scraps of attention. But beneath the surface, I was recording everything. Every phone call with Sarah, every carefully crafted text message, every detail she unknowingly divulged about the family's reunion, and more importantly, my uncle's potentially ruinous business dealings. I wasn't just collecting information, I was building a case, a digital fortress of evidence that would expose their hypocrisy and bring their gilded world crashing down around them. The journalist I'd contacted, a hungry young woman named Emily, was proving to be an invaluable asset. I fed her just enough to pique her interest, carefully guiding her towards the juiciest details of my uncle's scheme. She was digging deep, verifying sources, and building her own case, completely unaware that I was the puppet master pulling the strings. It was a delicate dance, a constant balancing act between providing her with enough information to keep her engaged and protecting myself from exposure. I knew that if my family got wind of what I was doing, they would come after me with everything they had. I needed to be careful, meticulous, and one step ahead of them at all times. One close call came when Sarah, in a moment of drunken vulnerability, confessed that she had told Mark about our renewed friendship. He had apparently warned her to be careful, to avoid getting involved in my drama. Sarah, bless her heart, had brushed it off, assuring him that I was harmless, that she was just trying to reconnect. But it was a warning sign, a reminder that they were watching me, that they suspected something was up. I knew I had to be even more cautious, to tighten my security, to make sure that I left no trace of my activities. I started using a VPN to mask my IP address, encrypting my emails, and clearing my browser history on a regular basis. I even purchased a burner phone, a cheap, disposable device that I used solely for communicating with Emily. It felt like something out of a spy movie, but I wasn't taking any chances. My family was powerful, influential, and ruthless. They would stop at nothing to protect their reputation, and I was determined to make them pay. The days leading up to the reunion were a blur of paranoia and anticipation. I barely slept, fueled by caffeine and adrenaline. I spent hours poring over legal documents, financial records, and social media posts, searching for any inconsistencies, any loopholes, any weaknesses I could exploit. I was obsessed, consumed by the need for revenge.
The plan was multifaceted, a carefully orchestrated series of events designed to inflict maximum damage. First, Emily would publish her article, exposing my uncle's shady business dealings to the world. The article would be timed to coincide with the reunion, ensuring that the news would break just as the family was gathered together, celebrating their success and privilege. The fallout would be immediate and devastating. My uncle's reputation would be ruined, his career shattered, and his family's wealth jeopardized. But that was just the beginning. I had also collected evidence of my family's hypocrisy, their judgmental attitudes, and their cruel treatment of me. I had recordings of their private conversations, screenshots of their insulting text messages, and photos of their lavish lifestyle. I planned to leak this information to the media as well, exposing their carefully constructed facade of perfection and revealing the ugly truth beneath. I wanted the world to see them for who they really were, shallow, selfish, and utterly devoid of empathy. To ensure that my plan went off without a hitch, I needed to be at the reunion, not as a guest, of course, but as an observer, a silent witness to their downfall. I had managed to secure a job working as a server at the resort where the reunion was being held. It was a menial task, but it gave me access to the inner workings of the event, allowing me to monitor their movements, overhear their conversations, and plant a few carefully placed seeds of discord. I even managed to install a few hidden cameras in strategic locations, capturing footage that would further expose their true colors. It was a risky move, but I was willing to do whatever it took to achieve my goal. The day of the reunion arrived, and I felt a strange mix of excitement and trepidation. I knew that everything was about to change, that my life would never be the same again. As I put on my uniform and headed to work, I couldn't help but smile. The storm was coming, and they had no idea. The resort buzzed with a frenetic energy, a gilded cage of forced smiles and strained pleasantries. As a server, I was invisible, a ghost gliding through the opulent ballroom, refilling champagne flutes and collecting discarded canapé plates. But my eyes missed nothing. I watched as my family arrived, each one more impeccably dressed and sickeningly cheerful than the last.
My uncle, the architect of my misery, held court with a swaggering confidence that made my skin crawl. My brother, ever the dutiful son, stood at his side, nodding and laughing at his jokes. And Sarah, bless her heart, clung to Mark's arm, her eyes darting around the room, desperately seeking approval. They were all there, basking in their privilege, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break. I slipped into the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest. Emily's article was scheduled to go live in less than an hour. It was time to set the final trap.
I found the head chef, a burly man with a perpetually harried expression, barking orders at his staff. I approached him with a nervous smile, pretending to be a diligent employee, eager to please. "Chef," I said, "Mr. Harrison asked me to bring him a special bottle of wine from the cellar. He said it was a vintage he's been saving for a special occasion." The chef grunted, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Which bottle?" he barked. I recited the name of the wine, a rare and expensive vintage that Sarah had mentioned in one of her drunken confessions. It was my uncle's prized possession, a symbol of his wealth and status. All right, the chef said, waving me towards the cellar. "Just be careful with it. That stuff is worth more than your life." I nodded meekly and hurried towards the cellar, my heart racing. The cellar was cool and dark, lined with rows upon rows of dusty bottles. I found the vintage I was looking for, its label ornate and ostentatious. I carefully removed it from the shelf and cradled it in my arms as if it were a newborn child. But this bottle wasn't going to be used for celebration. It was going to be a weapon. Back in the kitchen, I found a small, empty syringe tucked away in my apron pocket. I had acquired it from a friend who worked in a pharmacy, claiming that I needed it for an art project. In reality, it was going to be used to deliver a payload of information directly to my uncle. I slipped into a deserted corner of the kitchen and carefully extracted a small amount of the wine from the bottle. Then, using a dropper, I added a clear, odorless liquid to the wine. It was a powerful laxative, the kind that would cause explosive diarrhea within minutes. I had purchased it online after researching the most effective ways to humiliate someone publicly. The mixture was now complete. I carefully resealed the bottle, making sure that there was no visible sign of tampering. Then, with a deep breath, I walked back into the ballroom, my heart pounding in my chest. I spotted my uncle holding court near the buffet table, regaling a group of admirers with one of his self-aggrandizing stories. I approached him with a deferential smile, holding the bottle of wine in my hands. "Mr. Harrison," I said, "I have the special vintage you requested." My uncle's eyes lit up when he saw the bottle. "Ah, yes," he said, taking it from my hands. "My precious. Thank you, my dear." He turned to his audience, his voice booming with pride. "This, my friends, is a wine of exceptional quality, a vintage that is rarely seen, let alone tasted." He gestured for a waiter to bring him a glass. As the waiter poured the crimson liquid, my uncle raised his glass in a toast. "To family," he said, "and to success." He took a long, deliberate sip of the wine, his eyes closing in apparent ecstasy. "Magnificent," he declared. "Simply magnificent." I watched him, my heart pounding in my chest as he continued to sip the wine, oblivious to the impending disaster. Emily's article went live. Phones started buzzing. Faces started paling. But my uncle, mid-sentence, clutched his stomach. His face contorted in a grimace. "Excuse me," he stammered, his voice strained. "I seem to be feeling a bit unwell." He stumbled towards the restroom, his hand clamped firmly on his abdomen. The silence was deafening. Everyone stared. My brother rushed to his father's side, his face etched with concern. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The carefully constructed facade of perfection began to crumble. Then the screams started, high-pitched, desperate cries echoing from the restroom. My uncle, no longer the picture of success, burst from the restroom, his pants stained, his face a mask of mortification. He howled in rage, but it was cut short by another wave of stomach cramps. He collapsed to the floor, writhing in agony. The room erupted in chaos. People screamed, gasped, and pointed. My brother stood frozen, his face a mixture of horror and disbelief. Sarah burst into tears, and I simply stood there, amidst the carnage, a ghost in the machine, and smiled. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Because as my uncle lay groaning on the floor, his empire crumbling around him, Emily's article hit the news feeds, exposing his dirty dealings to the world.
And that was just the beginning. The hidden cameras were still rolling. The truth was about to be revealed. The final act was about to begin. The hidden cameras, my final act of vengeance, were strategically placed to capture everything that unfolded after my uncle's incident. One camera, disguised as a smoke detector in the hallway, captured the stampede as guests fled the scene, their faces a mixture of disgust and disbelief. Another, hidden inside a decorative plant near the buffet table, recorded Sarah's tearful meltdown as she berated Mark for his complicity in the family's crimes. But the most damning footage came from a camera I'd placed inside my uncle's private study. It showed my brother, the golden child, frantically shredding documents, attempting to erase any evidence of his father's wrongdoings. It was a futile effort. The digital fortress I had built was impenetrable. As the police arrived to investigate the scene, I slipped away unnoticed, melting back into the anonymity of the serving staff. I changed out of my uniform, gathered my belongings, and walked out of the resort, leaving behind the wreckage of my family's shattered empire. The storm had passed. The damage was done.
The following days were a whirlwind of media frenzy and legal battles. Emily's article went viral, sparking outrage and calls for my uncle to be held accountable. The footage from the hidden cameras surfaced online, further fueling the fire. My family's carefully constructed facade of perfection crumbled completely, revealing the ugly truth beneath. My uncle was stripped of his titles, his assets were frozen, and he faced multiple lawsuits and criminal charges. My brother, implicated in his father's schemes, was ostracized by his colleagues and friends. And Sarah, devastated by the betrayal of her husband and family, retreated into a world of her own, unable to cope with the shame and humiliation. They lost everything: their wealth, their status, their reputation, and their family. The world finally saw them as I always had: greedy, hypocritical, and utterly devoid of empathy. I watched it all unfold from a distance, a sense of detached satisfaction washing over me. I had achieved my goal. I had made them pay for their cruelty and injustice. But as I sat alone in my small apartment, surrounded by my art, I realized that revenge wasn't as sweet as I had imagined. It didn't fill the void in my heart or erase the pain of the past. It simply leveled the playing field. It silenced the voices that had haunted me for so long. It allowed me to finally move on. I had spent so many years consumed by anger and bitterness, allowing their actions to define me. Now I was free. I was no longer the victim. I was the survivor. The experience had changed me, hardened me, but it had also made me stronger. I had faced my demons and emerged victorious. I never spoke to my family again. I didn't attend my uncle's trial or my brother's wedding or Sarah's eventual decline. I simply disappeared from their lives, leaving them to grapple with the consequences of their actions. I focused on my art, pouring my emotions and experiences onto the canvas. My work became darker, more intense, but also more honest. It resonated with people, touching a nerve, sparking conversations about family, betrayal, and justice. I found a new purpose in sharing my story, in inspiring others to stand up for themselves and fight for what they believe in. They lost everything. I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.